My ex demanded I hand over my inheritance, but I had other plans. So after our divorce was finalized, my ex-wife had the nerve to demand my entire family inheritance. This story is a wild ride, so buckle up, and if you've ever had to deal with an entitled ex, do me a favor and hit that like button right now because you are definitely going to understand the rage I felt. She had this absolute, unshakable conviction that she was entitled to it, that it was somehow owed to her as a late payment for services rendered during our marriage. I thought the battle was over. I thought I could finally start healing and move on with my life, but one phone call just a few months after the ink on the divorce decree had dried proved how naive I was. It was a call that contained a demand so audacious, so utterly detached from reality, that for a moment I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. This is the story of that unbelievable demand, the profound sense of betrayal it ignited, and the rock-solid legal strategy one used to protect everything my parents had worked their whole lives for. Our story probably sounds pretty familiar at the start. I was married to Sarah for 7 years. When we first met, she was magnetic. Full of energy, full of life. In the beginning, things were genuinely great. I remember our first apartment. It was so small you could barely turn around, but it was ours. We'd stay up all night on the tiny balcony, drinking cheap wine and talking about the future. Or so I thought. Looking back, I realize I was the one talking about our future, and she was talking about her future, which would be funded by my career. Over time, I started to see a side of her I'd either missed or had chosen to ignore. Her dreams were always huge and flashy, but they always seemed to depend on my wallet. There was always some new, brilliant business idea she wanted to launch. There was the artisanal cupcake business that required a top-of-the-line commercial kitchen installed in our garage. It lasted 2 months, produced exactly 3 dozen cupcakes which we ate, and left me with a $5,000 bill for the equipment. Then there was the can't-miss investment in a friend's revolutionary new app, which turned out to be a social network for pets. My investment vanished along with the app's servers a few months later. When I would bring up the costs, she called it supporting her dreams. I later realized it was a one-way street and I was just the gas station. The last 2 years of our marriage were a slow, painful grind. The love and laughter were replaced by tension and constant arguments that always came back to money. My negativity, as she called it, was holding back her potential. When I finally decided I couldn't live like that anymore, the divorce was difficult to say the least. She fought for every single thing. She argued that her support of my career, the cupcakes and the pet apps, meant she deserved a much bigger piece of the pie. She even fought me for a set of antique chairs that had been in my family for generations, claiming she had developed an emotional attachment to them. These were the same chairs she'd complained were uncomfortable and wanted to replace just a year earlier. We spent months and thousands of dollars negotiating. In the end, the settlement was fair, at least according to the laws of our state. The papers were signed, the divorce was final, and I felt a sense of relief I hadn't felt in years. I was ready to close that chapter of my life. Just 3 months later, my world was turned upside down all over again, but this time in the worst way imaginable. I lost both of my parents. My mom had a sudden heart attack, and my dad, who had been battling an illness but seemed to be holding his own, just gave up. He passed away peacefully in his sleep less than 3 weeks later. It was sudden and completely heart-shattering. My parents were my rock. My mom was the one who could make you feel like the most important person in the world with just a smile. My dad was quieter, but his advice was like gold. He was the most principled man I'd ever known. Losing one was a nightmare. Losing them both within a month. The world just went silent. The house I grew up in suddenly felt cavernous, every creak and groan a ghost of a memory. They had worked tirelessly their entire lives, building a comfortable life not just for themselves, but always thinking about the future. They left me a significant inheritance. It wasn't a lottery win, but the real, tangible result of a lifetime of hard work and careful planning. It was 40 years of my dad getting up before dawn to go to a job he didn't always love. It was my mom's careful budgeting, turning down new clothes so they could save a little more. It was their dream of providing a foundation, a safety net for their child. It was a physical manifestation of their love, and in the middle of all my grief, my only thought was how I could honor their legacy. I had absolutely no idea that someone from my past was already making her own plans for it. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I saw Sarah's name flash on my phone screen and my stomach just dropped into a black hole. We hadn't spoken a single word since the divorce was finalized. 1,000 bad memories flashed through my mind in the 3 seconds it rang. The arguments, the slammed doors, the nights spent sleeping on the couch. My thumb hovered over the red decline button. I should have pressed it. God, I should have pressed it. But a part of me, the part that still couldn't comprehend how the person I'd once loved had become this stranger, had to know what she wanted. I answered. Her voice was strangely calm, almost like she was calling about a business deal. There was no, "How are you holding up?" No, I'm sorry to hear about your parents. She just cut right to the chase. I need you to have your lawyer draw up the papers to transfer the inheritance to me, she said as casually as if she were asking me to pass the salt. I was dead silent. My brain short-circuited. I was sure I'd misheard her. What did you just say? I finally managed to choke out. The inheritance, she repeated, and now I could hear a distinct hint of impatience in her voice, like I was being deliberately slow. I expect you to sign it over. All of it. Are you joking? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. This has to be some kind of sick joke. I've never been more serious, she replied coolly. It's what's fair. Fair? Sir, we are divorced. The judge decided what was fair. We signed the papers. It's over. That was before, she said. This is a change in circumstances. The absolute breathtaking nerve of it was like a physical blow. I asked her why on God's green earth she would possibly think she was entitled to my family's legacy. Her explanation was a masterclass in delusion and entitlement. She claimed that during our 7-year marriage she had become a core part of the family. She brought up the time my father was sick and she'd made him soup. She mentioned organizing their 40th anniversary party. I was like a daughter to them, she insisted. That created a familial bond that your little piece of paper can't erase. Her twisted logic continued. She claimed she had supported me, which in her mind meant she had given my parents peace of mind, which in turn allowed them to build their savings. Her most insane claim was that our finalized divorce was just a technicality and that her status as an ex-wife who had given me the best years of her life still gave her a claim on my future. I felt this cold, murderous rage building up inside me. It felt like the sound in the room was being replaced by a high-pitched ringing. My knuckles were white from gripping the phone. Every word she spoke was a shovelful of dirt being thrown on my parents' fresh graves. But then I remembered a piece of advice my father, who was a lawyer, gave me years ago. I was a teenager complaining about a bully. I wanted to fight him. My dad sat me down and said, "Son, some people operate in a world without logic. Don't step into the mud with them. Let them swing wildly in their own filth until they show everyone exactly who they are." That voice, his voice, cut through the red haze of my anger. I let her show her whole hand. I kept my own voice as level as I could. "That's a significant request, Sarah," I said, the words feeling like poison in my mouth. "I'll have my lawyer look into the legal standing of a claim like that." "Good," she said, her tone dripping with smugness. "He'll see it's the right thing to do. It's what your parents would have wanted." That last line was the final twist of the knife. The idea that she would dare speak for my parents, using their memory as a tool for her greed, was disgusting. It just piled on top of the grief I was already drowning in and turned my sadness into this deep, chilling sense of betrayal. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking, not with fear but with a new, ice-cold resolve. He thought she was being clever. She had no idea I had other plans, but here's what Sarah didn't know. My father wasn't just a lawyer, he was a meticulous planner who believed in protecting his family above all else. He'd seen dozens of messy divorces among his clients and was dead set on making sure his life's work would never get caught in that kind of crossfire. Years ago, long before I even met Sarah, my dad sat me down at the dining room table for a serious talk. "One day," he told me, spreading a thick file of documents out, "you're going to meet someone and you're going to think they're the one. And I hope they are. But hope isn't a legal strategy. Love is about trust, but protecting your legacy is about ink and paper." His solution was an irrevocable trust. This wasn't something we just threw together. The inheritance, including the family home and all the financial assets, had been placed into this specially designed legal entity. I was the beneficiary, sure, but the assets were legally owned by the trust itself. The most important part? This was all done and dusted when I was 22 years old, years before my marriage. This legal fortress was specifically designed to wall off the inheritance as my separate property, legally untouchable by any future spouse. He called it the firewall. When I called my lawyer the next day and explained the situation, I could almost hear his grim satisfaction. David had worked with my dad for years and knew all about his meticulous nature. "I'm so sorry you're dealing with this on top of everything else," he said with a heavy sigh, "but honestly, I'm not surprised she's trying. Your dad always said to prepare for the worst even when you're expecting the best." He pulled up all the documents from my divorce and my father's estate plan. First, he confirmed what I already knew: the trust was airtight. Think of it like this. Marital property is a pot of soup you both add ingredients to during the marriage. Separate property is a sealed container you bring to the marriage. As long as you never open that container and dump it into the soup pot, never use it to pay joint bills, never put it in a joint account, it stays yours alone. The assets from my parents were always in separate accounts and were never once used to pay for our life together. Sarah was demanding my sealed container, claiming that because she liked the soup she was now entitled to it. That's just not how it works. Second, he pointed out something Sarah's greed had completely blinded her to. Our finalized divorce severed all her legal claims to my family. Her demand wasn't just shameless, it was legally ridiculous. In our state, as in most places, a finalized divorce automatically revokes an ex-spouse's rights. If she had been named in a will, the law would act as if she had predeceased me. The consent order from our divorce, which spelled out the final division of everything we owned together, was the last word. It said nothing about future inheritances because by law she had no claim to them. My lawyer told me to just sit tight and not answer any more of her calls or texts. He would handle everything. My strategy was simple: present the undeniable facts and let her and her lawyer run headfirst into the legal brick wall my father had so brilliantly built. About a week later, my lawyer received a formal demand letter from Sarah's new attorney. It was just as arrogant as she'd been on the phone, laying out some bizarre argument about her emotional investment in my family and her non-financial contributions to my parents' well-being. Her lawyer, who I can only assume was working on contingency, had clearly taken her at her word and was trying to play hardball. A meeting was scheduled. I wasn't there, but my lawyer, David, told me the whole scene played out like something from a movie. David said Sarah and her lawyer walked into the conference room like they owned the place. Sarah had this little smirk on her face, apparently ready to watch her legal pit bull tear me to shreds. Her lawyer launched into this whole performance, a passionate speech about fairness, moral obligations and Sarah's emotional equity in my family's estate. When he finally finished, my lawyer didn't argue. He didn't debate feelings or morals. He just pushed a thick folder across the mahogany table. "I think you'll find these documents clarifying," he said calmly. David told me he laid it out piece by piece. "First," he said, pushing a document forward, "is the irrevocable trust, established and funded when my client was 22 years old, a full 3 years before he ever met your client." He slid the next one across. "Second, a complete accounting history showing zero commingling of these trust assets with any marital funds. They have always been legally separate property." Then the third, a copy of the final, signed and court-ratified divorce decree, in which your client agreed to the full and final settlement of all assets. And for the grand finale, the final nail in the coffin. And lastly, David said, a highlighted copy of the state's probate code, which explicitly nullifies any and all claims from a former spouse upon a finalized divorce. As Sarah's lawyer read through it all, his face just fell. The confident, aggressive posture completely deflated. The color drained from his face, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped look. He was a professional and he knew a losing battle when he saw one. He knew this wasn't just a weak case, it was a non-existent one. Sarah, though, didn't get it. She saw her lawyer's face and started to panic. "What is it?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Tell them it's not right. I gave him the best years of my life. I deserve this." Her lawyer quietly tried to explain that the assets were never marital property and that the trust made her claim legally impossible. Her voice got louder, her composure finally cracking into a raw, ugly display of entitlement. "He tricked me. This isn't fair. What do you mean it's impossible? You told me I had a case. You told me we could win," she shrieked, turning on her own counsel. My lawyer simply stood up. "The law is perfectly clear," he stated, his voice cutting through her tirade. "Your marriage is over. The divorce is final. This inheritance is and always has been separate property protected by an irrevocable trust. There is nothing further to discuss." He packed up his briefcase and walked out, leaving her sputtering in a conference room with a lawyer who had just realized he wasn't getting paid. After that, it was mostly just silence. The pathetic text started a few hours later, a mix of threats and insults. "You'll be hearing from my new, better lawyer. I'm telling everyone what a monster you are. I hope you're happy alone with your precious money." Each message was a sad little confirmation that I had made the right decision years ago. It was like watching a toddler throw a tantrum after being told, no. Her own lawyer, facing a guaranteed loss and, as David explained, potential sanctions from the court for filing a frivolous lawsuit, officially dropped her case in a letter a couple of weeks later. He didn't just drop it because he'd lose. He dropped it because a judge could have sanctioned him, forcing him to pay my legal fees for wasting the court's time. Her greed was so extreme it had become professionally toxic. At first, the victory felt hollow. Her greed had poisoned a time of intense grief, forcing me to switch from mourning my parents to defending what they had left behind. It was an ugly, profound betrayal that showed me a side of her that was far more ruthless than I ever could have imagined. For a while it was hard to look at old photos. All I could see was a transaction. Was she ever really happy with me or just with what I could provide? It was a poison that seeped backward in time, tainting even the good memories. But as the weeks turned into months, that feeling was replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude for my father's wisdom and foresight. My father's plan was the antidote. He had given me one last gift: peace of mind. His planning allowed me to avoid a long, draining legal battle that could have wiped out the estate and my spirit along with it. With the legal threats gone, I could finally focus on what really mattered. I kept the family home, which is no longer a cavern of grief but a sanctuary of memories that I will preserve for the next generation. I used a portion of the inheritance to set up the James and Margaret Legacy Scholarship at the local community college. They both believed in the power of a practical education, and now their hard work pays the tuition and book fees for 2 students every year in the nursing and trade programs. Their legacy isn't just safe, it's out there doing some good in the world, turning Sarah's attempted greed into tangible good. This whole ordeal taught me that sometimes the biggest battles you fight are the ones that happen after the war is supposedly over. Her greed was a painful lesson, but it taught me how important it is to plan ahead. She let her entitlement completely cloud her judgment, and in the end she was left with nothing but her own bitterness and, I assume, some legal bills. My parents' legacy is safe, and for that I am forever thankful. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever had to deal with this level of entitlement from an ex, or anyone else for that matter? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read all of them. And if you found this story compelling, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more. Thanks for listening.